The gavel's echo had barely faded when Officer Trent Barlow made the gravest mistake of his life. He glanced at a man in a cheap suit and instantly dismissed him as an easy mark. Little did he realize that the man he had just shoved right there in open court was a decorated Navy SEAL who still had one crucial call to make. The atmosphere in Courtroom 302 of the Fulton County Courthouse hung thick with the scent of polished floors, the sharp tang of nervous sweat, and the heavy, stale bureaucracy of the justice system. The heavy oak benches were packed with the morning's docket, tired people waiting to plead guilty to minor infractions, hoping to salvage the remainder of their day. Sitting quietly in the second row, Wyatt Harlan did not look like a man fighting for his freedom. He sat perfectly still, his breathing measured, his posture radiating a quiet, dangerous calm. He wore an off-the-rack navy suit that pulled slightly across his broad shoulders, a tactical concession to blend in rather than impress. Case number 4-092, the bailiff bellowed, his voice cutting through the low murmur of the gallery. State versus Wyatt Harlan. Charges: resisting arrest, failure to comply, and assault on a police officer. Wyatt stood up, smoothing his jacket, and walked past the low wooden swinging gate towards the defense table. He was alone. No public defender, no high-priced attorney, pro se. At the prosecution's table sat Assistant District Attorney Owen Langley, a young, overworked lawyer who hadn't bothered to look up from his file. But it was the man sitting in the gallery's front row, waiting to be called as the state's primary witness, who drew the room's oxygen. Officer Trent Barlow of the Metro Police Department. Barlow was a heavy-set man with a thick neck, a flushed complexion, and a uniform stretched tight over a barrel chest. He wore his badge like a shield of absolute immunity. His eyes locked onto Wyatt with a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. It was the look of a predator who had already eaten and was now just playing with the bones. Judge Eleanor Hargrove emerged from her chambers. She was a no-nonsense jurist with silver hair and a reputation for crushing courtroom theatrics. She took her seat, adjusted her reading glasses, and peered down at Wyatt. Mr. Harlan, Judge Hargrove began, her voice dry. I see you are still unrepresented by counsel. I strongly advised you against this during your arraignment. Are you certain you wish to proceed pro se? I am, Your Honor, Wyatt replied. His voice was deep, resonant, and entirely stripped of the anxiety Hargrove usually heard from pro se defendants. Very well. Mr. Langley, call your first witness. The state calls Officer Trent Barlow, Langley announced, finally looking up. Barlow swaggered past the defense table, deliberately bumping his heavy-duty belt against the corner of Wyatt's table. It was a petty, juvenile move designed to establish dominance. Wyatt didn't even blink. Barlow took the stand, swore on the Bible, and settled into the leather chair, leaning back with an air of absolute authority. Under Langley's direct examination, Barlow spun a masterful, well-rehearsed narrative. He testified that he pulled Wyatt over in the affluent neighborhood of Oak Ridge for a broken tail light. He claimed that Wyatt immediately became belligerent, refused to hand over his license, and stepped out of the vehicle aggressively. He was acting erratic, Your Honor, Barlow testified, looking directly at the judge, playing the victim with practiced ease. I gave him 3 lawful orders to return to his vehicle. He refused. When I attempted to detain him for my own safety, he violently pushed me back, forcing me to deploy my taser to subdue him. Even then, he fought like a wild animal. A quiet murmur rippled through the gallery. The story was a familiar one in this courthouse. An angry civilian, a heroic officer, just trying to do his job. The conviction was practically a formality. "Thank you, officer," Langley said, sitting down. "Your witness." Wyatt stood slowly. He picked up a single yellow legal pad. He didn't pace. He didn't show anger. He simply stood at the podium, an immovable object. "Officer Barlow," Wyatt began, his tone conversational. "You stated that you pulled me over for a broken right tail light. Is that correct?" "That's right," Barlow sneered, leaning forward. "And you also stated that I was acting erratically, which made you fear for your safety. You were shouting, waving your arms. I didn't know if you had a weapon." Wyatt looked down at his legal pad. "Officer, my vehicle is a 2024 model leased from a military dealership. It is equipped with an onboard diagnostic system. I have here a certified diagnostic report pulled by the dealership after my vehicle was impounded. It shows no electrical faults and no broken bulbs." He approached the clerk to submit the document. "Defense Exhibit A, Your Honor." Langley frowned, scrambling through his own papers. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. A bulb could have been loose." "Overruled," Hargrove said, studying the document. "Continue, Mr. Harlan." "Furthermore, officer," Wyatt said, his eyes locking onto Barlow, "you testified I stepped out of the vehicle and aggressively approached you. Do you recall where my hands were?" "They were clenched into fists," Barlow lied smoothly. "I see." Wyatt tilted his head. "Officer Barlow, are you aware that Oak Ridge is a highly secure neighborhood? Specifically, are you aware of the high-definition security camera mounted on the private gate of the residence at 442 Elm Street, the exact location where you initiated the stop?" Barlow's flushed face lost a fraction of its color. His jaw tightened. I can't speak to private security cameras." "I can," Wyatt said softly. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I have subpoenaed the footage from that private residence. I have a copy here on a flash drive, and I have already provided a copy to the district attorney's office, though it seems Mr. Langley hasn't reviewed his mail." Langley bolted upright. "Your Honor, the state had no time to review this." "You've had it for days, Mr. Langley," Judge Hargrove snapped. "Bailiff, set up the monitor." As the screen flickered to life, the courtroom held its collective breath. The black and white infrared footage was crystal clear. It showed Wyatt's car pulling over smoothly. It showed Barlow's cruiser aggressively pulling up behind it. But the crucial detail played out in silence. Wyatt never stepped out of his car. The video showed Barlow marching up to the driver's side window. It showed Barlow, without provocation, ripping the car door open, grabbing Wyatt by the collar of his jacket, and dragging him out onto the wet asphalt. Wyatt's hands were clearly visible in the footage, empty, raised in a posture of complete surrender. Barlow then drove his knee into Wyatt's back and fired his taser directly into the prone man's shoulder. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Judge Hargrove's gavel slammed down like a gunshot. "Order! Order in this court!" Wyatt didn't look at the monitor. He kept his eyes fixed on Barlow. The cop was no longer leaning back. He was gripping the edges of the witness box, his knuckles white, a vein pulsing furiously at his temple. The predator had suddenly realized the trap had already sprung. "Officer Barlow," Wyatt said, his voice dropping an octave, echoing with military command. "Would you like to revise your sworn testimony?" The silence that followed Wyatt's question was heavy, suffocating. The air in courtroom 302 felt thick, practically crackling with the static electricity of a lie violently exposed. Officer Trent Barlow sat frozen in the witness box. His eyes darted from the frozen frame on the monitor, showing him actively brutalizing a compliant man to the stern, furious face of Judge Hargrove. And finally, back to Wyatt. The smug arrogance that had coated Barlow like cheap cologne was gone, replaced by a volatile, dangerous panic. The video, the angle is misleading. Barlow stammered, his voice lacking its previous booming confidence. It doesn't show the whole context. It doesn't show him reaching under the seat before I opened the door. Reaching under the seat? Wyatt repeated, his tone icy. He walked back to his table and picked up another piece of paper. That's fascinating because I have here the official inventory report of my vehicle, filled out by your partner, Officer Reyes. The car was empty. But more importantly, Officer Barlow, let's talk about protocol. If you suspected I was reaching for a weapon, standard operating procedure dictates you draw your firearm and issue verbal commands from a position of cover behind your engine block. You did not do that. You holstered your weapon, opened my door, and dragged me out. That isn't the action of a police officer in fear for his life. That is the action of a man who enjoys inflicting pain. "Objection!" Ada Langley yelled, his voice cracking slightly. "Counsel is badgering the witness and testifying." "Sustained," Judge Hargrove said, though her glare was firmly fixed on the police officer. "Mr. Harlan, keep to questions. Officer Barlow, you are under oath. I suggest you remember the penalties for perjury." Barlow was seething. His face had turned a deep, mottled purple. He was a man used to absolute compliance on the streets. He was used to civilians cowering, apologizing, begging. He was not used to being dismantled piece by piece by a calm man in a cheap suit in front of a gallery of onlookers. "You don't know what it's like out there," Barlow spat, pointing a thick, trembling finger at Wyatt. "You sit here with your little papers and your videos trying to play lawyer. You're just a thug trying to game the system." "Officer Barlow, you will control yourself," the judge warned sharply. Wyatt ignored the outburst. He stepped closer to the witness stand. "Let's move to the physical altercation itself. You claimed I fought like a wild animal. Do I look like I fought you, officer? There isn't a single mark on you. In fact, the only medical records submitted to this court are mine. A dislocated shoulder, a severe concussion, and burns from a taser deployed at point-blank range." "You were high," Barlow shouted, abandoning any pretense of professionalism. "You were tweaking on something. I could see it in your eyes." "My blood toxicology report, submitted as Defense Exhibit B, shows 0 illicit substances in my system," Wyatt countered flawlessly. "0 alcohol. I don't even drink coffee." Wyatt paused, letting the silence stretch before delivering the killing blow. "But let's look at your record. Officer Barlow, according to a FOIA request I filed, on the Metro Force, you have accrued 14 excessive force complaints. 12 of them involved unarmed black men. 3 of them resulted in out-of-court settlements paid by the city." "Objection. Highly prejudicial." Langley was on his feet again, visibly sweating. "This is character assassination." "I'll sustain the objection," Judge Hargrove said. "The jury will disregard the mention of prior complaints." She looked at Wyatt. "Mr. Harlan, we are dealing with the events of the traffic stop." "Understood, Your Honor," Wyatt said smoothly. Wyatt turned his back on Barlow and began walking toward his table. It was the ultimate display of dismissal. To a man like Barlow, a playground bully armed with a badge and state-sanctioned violence, being dismissed was a greater insult than being punched. Something in Barlow snapped. The logic circuits in his brain, already overloaded by panic and humiliation, shorted out completely. He saw his career evaporating. He saw the prospect of perjury charges, and the man responsible was simply walking away, turning his back. "I'm not done with you, you arrogant son of a—" Barlow bellowed before Judge Hargrove could bang her gavel. Before the elderly bailiff could even reach for his radio, Barlow vaulted out of the witness box. He crossed the short distance between the stand and the defense table in 3 heavy strides. He bypassed all courtroom protocol, driven entirely by blind, animalistic rage. "Bailiff, restrain him!" Judge Hargrove screamed, rising from her chair. Barlow lunged at Wyatt's back, reaching out with both hands to grab Wyatt by the neck, intending to throw him face first into the heavy oak table. He never made contact. Wyatt Harlan was a chief petty officer in the United States Navy SEALs, a veteran of 4 combat deployments, and a Tier 1 hand-to-hand combat instructor. His situational awareness was not turned off simply because he was in a courtroom. He had heard the squeak of Barlow's boots. He had felt the shift in air pressure. He knew Barlow was coming before the man even swore. As Barlow's hands closed in, Wyatt dropped his center of gravity and pivoted sharply on his heel. He didn't block. He redirected. Wyatt's left hand shot up, securing Barlow's thick right wrist. With a fluid, practiced motion that looked almost like a dance step, Wyatt stepped outside Barlow's momentum. He twisted the officer's arm behind his back, applied immediate, agonizing pressure to the elbow joint, and swept Barlow's right leg out from under him. It took less than 2 seconds. There was a loud crash that shook the courtroom floorboards as Barlow's 240-pound frame slammed face first into the linoleum. Before Barlow could even comprehend he was falling, Wyatt's knee was pressed firmly into the back of his neck, not enough to crush the windpipe, but precisely enough to paralyze his central nervous system and keep him pinned securely. Wyatt's grip on Barlow's arm was absolute. Locking the limb in a strict submission hold, Barlow let out a high-pitched, breathless squeal of pain. His face mashed against the dirty floor. He tried to thrash, but he was completely immobilized. The courtroom descended into absolute pandemonium. The gallery screamed. A D.A. Langley fell backward over his chair. The bailiff, Raymond, finally arrived, unholstering his weapon with trembling hands, aiming it vaguely at the tangle of bodies on the floor. "Freeze! Let him go! Get off him!" The bailiff yelled, panicking. Wyatt didn't move an inch. He looked up at the bailiff, his eyes completely calm, his breathing slow and steady. There was no rage in his expression, only cold, clinical control. "Bailiff," Wyatt said, his voice projecting clearly over the chaos. "Lower your weapon. I'm performing a citizen's arrest on this man for aggravated assault. My knee is applying non-lethal compliance pressure. If he struggles, his arm will break. If you shoot me, he will likely die in the crossfire." "Order! Drop the weapon, Raymond!" Judge Hargrove commanded, her voice slicing through the panic. She stared down at the scene, her chest heaving. "Mr. Harlan, release him." "With respect, Your Honor, no," Wyatt replied firmly, keeping his eyes on the judge. "This man is armed with a Glock 19, a taser, and OC spray. He has just demonstrated severe emotional instability and violent intent. Until he is disarmed by another sworn officer, releasing him is a tactical error I am not willing to make." Barlow groaned, a pathetic sound escaping his squished lips. "My arm, you're breaking it. Don't move, Trent," Wyatt whispered down to the man, the command absolute. Judge Hargrove looked at the trembling bailiff. "Raymond, take Officer Barlow's weapons, now." Slowly, carefully, the bailiff knelt down. He unclipped Barlow's duty belt, sliding the heavy rig away across the floor. Once the weapons were secure, Wyatt gracefully stood up, releasing the joint lock in one smooth motion. He stepped back, brushing a speck of dust off his cheap suit. Barlow scrambled to his feet, clutching his arm, his face red with humiliation and fury. He looked ready to charge again, but the bailiff stepped between them. "You're dead, you hear me?" Barlow spat, losing the last shred of his sanity. "You assaulted a police officer. You're going away for life." Wyatt calmly straightened his tie. He turned his attention back to the judge, who was staring at him as if he had just dropped out of the sky. "Your Honor," Wyatt said, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent courtroom. "As a victim of an unprovoked assault in your courtroom, and as a citizen whose constitutional rights have been egregiously violated, I would like to invoke my right to make one phone call." "A phone call?" Judge Hargrove asked, bewildered. "Mr. Harlan, you are not the one under arrest. Officer Barlow is in contempt of court, and frankly, I am referring this to internal affairs." "Internal affairs won't be necessary, Your Honor," Wyatt said, reaching into his inner suit pocket, "because I am not just a civilian, and this wasn't just a traffic stop." He pulled out a sleek, encrypted satellite phone to let them know the bait was taken. The heavy mahogany doors of courtroom 302 remained shut, but the atmosphere inside had irrevocably shifted. The space, previously dominated by the state's authority, now belonged entirely to the man in the cheap navy suit. Wyatt Harlan held the bulky, matte black satellite phone to his ear. It was a piece of hardware that did not belong in a civilian traffic court. It was military-grade, encrypted, and impervious to local cell tower interception. Officer Trent Barlow, disarmed and humiliated, leaned heavily against the wooden railing of the gallery, clutching his hyperextended right elbow. His chest heaved with ragged breaths. The adrenaline that had propelled his violent outburst was rapidly metabolizing into a cold, paralyzing dread. He looked at Assistant District Attorney Owen Langley for support, but the young prosecutor was furiously shoving papers into his briefcase, desperately trying to distance himself from the radioactive fallout of the last few minutes. "Control, this is Chief Harlan. Authentication, Alpha Romeo 9er. Wyatt spoke into the receiver. His voice was flat, devoid of the adrenaline that was suffocating everyone else in the room. "The target took the bait. Escalation confirmed. Physical assault on my person in open court. Fully recorded on the county record. Execute Phase 3. Wyatt listened for a fraction of a second, nodded once, and ended the call. He slipped the phone back into his jacket pocket and turned to face the bench. Judge Eleanor Hargrove had not moved. She was a veteran of the bench, having presided over murder trials, gang indictments, and high-profile corporate fraud. But she had never witnessed a defendant physically subdue a testifying police officer and then call in a tactical strike. "Mr. Harlan," Judge Hargrove began, her voice dangerously low, "I demand to know exactly who you just called and what in God's name is happening in my courtroom. You are standing on a razor's edge of contempt, Your Honor." "I apologize for the disruption," Wyatt said, his tone respectful but unyielding. "I am not acting as a private citizen today. I'm operating under a joint federal task force, specifically a coordinated effort between the Naval Criminal Investigative Service and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. A collective gasp echoed from the sparse gallery. A.D.A. Langley froze, a file folder slipping from his sweaty hands and scattering across the floor. "The DOJ!" Langley squeaked, his voice cracking. "The state had no knowledge because your office, Mr. Langley, is compromised by its blind reliance on corrupt officers," Wyatt cut in sharply. He turned his gaze back to the judge. "For some time, the FBI and the DOJ have been quietly investigating the Metro Police Department's 4th Precinct for a systemic pattern of civil rights violations, unlawful detentions, and asset forfeiture fraud. Officer Barlow and his partner, Officer Reyes, were identified as the primary instigators of a shakedown ring targeting minorities in affluent neighborhoods." Barlow pushed himself off the railing, his face a mask of desperate denial. "He's lying. This is a setup. Judge, you can't listen to this thug." "Silence!" Hargrove roared, slamming her gavel so hard the handle cracked. She pointed a trembling finger at Barlow. "You will not speak another word in this room unless spoken to, officer, or I will have Raymond lock you in the holding cell downstairs." Wyatt calmly approached the bench, retrieving a sealed manila envelope from his briefcase. "Your Honor, the vehicle I was driving during the traffic stop was not a standard lease. It was a federally supplied bait car, rigged with 4 concealed 4K audio-visual recording devices, biometric sensors on the steering wheel, and a direct uplink to an FBI surveillance van parked 3 blocks away." He placed the envelope on the judge's bench. Inside this envelope is a sworn affidavit from Special Agent Garrett Knox of the FBI Public Corruption Unit, along with a mandate from the Attorney General's office. It authorizes my deep cover deployment. We needed to prove that Officer Barlow was not just reacting to perceived threats, but actively creating them to justify violent arrests and illegal vehicle searches. He didn't know who I was. He just saw a black man in an expensive car in Oak Ridge, and his established pattern of predatory behavior took over. Before Judge Hargrove could break the seal on the envelope, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a resounding crack. The noise startled the bailiff, who reached for his empty holster before remembering he was holding Barlow's weapon. Marching down the center aisle was a team of 5 men and women in dark suits, their FBI credentials clipped clearly to their breast pockets. Leading them was a tall, sharply dressed man with silver hair and a demeanor that brooked absolutely no nonsense. "Special Agent Garrett Knox, Federal Bureau of Investigation," the man announced, his voice carrying effortlessly across the room. He bypassed the swinging gate and approached the bench, flashing his badge to Judge Hargrove. "Your Honor, forgive the intrusion. We were monitoring the live audio feed from Mr. Harlan's covert wire. When the subject initiated a physical assault, we moved in." Judge Hargrove looked from the federal agent to the calm Navy SEAL, and finally down at the sweating, terrified police officer. The reality of the situation settled over the courtroom like a heavy iron blanket. "Agent Knox," Hargrove said, adjusting her glasses, "are you telling me this entire proceeding was a federal sting operation?" "Not the proceeding, Your Honor," Knox corrected. "The trial was simply the rope we gave Officer Barlow to hang himself. He just tied the noose, stepped on the stool, and kicked it away." The courtroom felt suffocatingly small for Trent Barlow. The walls were closing in, the fluorescent lights glaring down like harsh interrogators. The absolute power he had wielded for years on the streets of the 4th Precinct, the badge that made him a god among civilians, was suddenly utterly worthless. "Agent Knox, this is highly irregular," Ada Langley stammered, stepping out from behind his desk. "My office has jurisdiction over state charges. If there is a federal investigation, the district attorney should have been briefed." Knox turned slowly to look at the young prosecutor. The look of disdain on the veteran agent's face was withering. "Mr. Langley, your office has dismissed, ignored, or actively buried 22 excessive force complaints against this officer. Your boss, District Attorney Reynolds, has built a re-election campaign on backing the blue, even when the blue is covered in dirt. We didn't brief you because we couldn't trust you." Langley opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. He sank back into his chair, realizing his career was likely going to be collateral damage in this federal hurricane. Knox gestured to 2 of his agents, who immediately flanked Officer Barlow. "Trent Barlow," Knox said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his jacket. "I have here a federal warrant for your arrest. You are being charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, a violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 242. You are also being charged with aggravated assault on a federal task force officer, perjury, and obstruction of justice." "You can't do this," Barlow shrieked, his voice jumping an octave. The sheer panic had finally broken through his anger. He looked at the bailiff. "Raymond, do something. They're kidnapping a police officer." The bailiff, Raymond, a man who had known Barlow for years, slowly turned his back, staring intently at the American flag behind the judge's bench. "Furthermore," Knox continued, ignoring the outburst, "we have just executed a search warrant on your partner, Officer Reyes, who is currently in federal custody. He lasted about 10 minutes in the interrogation room before he flipped. He has provided a full statement detailing the Oak Ridge tax, the cash you stole from the glove compartments of the people you illegally detained. He also confirmed that the baggie of narcotics found in the trunk of a college student named Jordan Weaver was planted by you." The mention of the planted drugs sucked the remaining air from the room. Judge Hargrove's face turned from stern to utterly disgusted. "Is this true, Officer Barlow?" Hargrove asked, her voice trembling with righteous fury. "Have you been using my courtroom to imprison innocent people to cover your own corruption?" Barlow didn't answer. He couldn't. His knees finally buckled, and if the 2 FBI agents hadn't been holding him up by his armpits, he would have collapsed onto the floor. The bully had been completely stripped of his armor. Wyatt Harlan watched the man break. He felt no joy, no triumphant vindication. He felt only the cold satisfaction of a mission accomplished. He thought of his younger cousin, a bright engineering student who had been pulled over by Barlow a year ago, beaten so badly he permanently lost vision in his left eye, all because he fit a description and dared to ask why he was being stopped. The system had protected Barlow then. The Internal Affairs Division had cleared him. The Union had shielded him. That was the moment Wyatt, fresh off a deployment in Syria, had approached his contacts in federal law enforcement. He had offered himself as the perfect bait, a man who could take a beating, maintain total physical and emotional control, and trap a predator on tape. "Agent Knox," Wyatt said quietly, breaking the silence. "The secondary objective?" "Secured, Chief Harlan." Knox nodded. While Officer Barlow was busy perjuring himself in this room, an FBI SWAT team raided the 4th Precinct evidence locker. We have secured the private dashcam footage Barlow thought he deleted, as well as the burner phones he used to coordinate with his confidential informants. We brought in forensic auditors from Kroll Associates to track the missing civil forfeiture funds. They found the offshore accounts 20 minutes ago. The mention of the private forensic firm Kroll, renowned globally for unraveling complex financial crimes, was the final nail in the coffin. Barlow knew how thorough they were. There would be no hiding the money. "It's over, Barlow," Wyatt said, stepping closer. He looked down into the terrified, bloodshot eyes of the corrupt cop. "You built a career on fear. You preyed on people who didn't have the money, the power, or the voice to fight back. You thought you were untouchable because you wore a uniform. But a uniform doesn't make you a man, and a badge doesn't put you above the law. It just makes your fall that much harder." Barlow wept. It wasn't a dignified cry. It was the ugly, snot-nosed sobbing of a coward facing the consequences of his actions for the very first time. "I was just doing my job," he whimpered. "The streets are dangerous. You don't know." "I fought in actual war zones, Trent," Wyatt replied, his voice chillingly calm. "I know exactly what dangerous looks like, and it looks exactly like a coward with a gun and no accountability." Judge Hargrove had seen enough. She struck her gavel one final time, the sound ringing with undeniable finality. "Mr. Langley," she snapped, directing her wrath at the prosecuting attorney, "you will immediately file a motion to dismiss all charges against Mr. Harlan with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering a comprehensive judicial review of every single conviction secured in this courthouse where Trent Barlow was the primary arresting officer. Your office will cooperate fully with the federal authorities, or I will hold District Attorney Reynolds in contempt." Langley nodded furiously, his face pale. "Yes, Your Honor. Immediately." "As for you, Mr. Barlow," Judge Hargrove said, leaning over the bench, her eyes blazing with disgust, "you have disgraced the uniform you wear. You have made a mockery of this justice system. You have preyed upon the very citizens you swore an oath to protect. I cannot sentence you today, but I promise you this. When your federal trial concludes, I will personally write a letter to the sentencing judge recommending you be placed in the general population." Barlow let out a pathetic wail at the mention of the general population. A corrupt cop in a federal penitentiary was a dead man walking. "Agent Knox, get him out of my sight," Hargrove ordered. "He makes me sick." The FBI agents forcefully spun Barlow around. One of them pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Wait," Wyatt said softly. He walked over to the bailiff's desk and picked up the duty belt that had been stripped from Barlow earlier. He detached the officer's own handcuffs, the very cuffs Barlow had slapped onto the wrists of countless innocent people. Wyatt tossed them to the FBI agent. "Use these." The agent caught them with a grim smile. He wrenched Barlow's arms behind his back, ignoring the man's cries of pain from his injured elbow, and ratcheted the steel cuffs down tight. Click, click. The sound was poetic. It was the sound of a reign of terror ending. Barlow was frog-marched down the center aisle of Courtroom 302. The few people in the gallery who had started the morning dreading their own minor legal troubles watched in stunned silence as the untouchable god of the 4th Precinct was paraded out like a common criminal. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind him, cutting off his pathetic sobs. The courtroom was quiet again. Judge Hargrove looked down at Wyatt. The anger in her face had subsided, replaced by a profound respect. "Mr. Harlan, I must admit, when you refused counsel, I thought you were a fool. I see now that the only fool in this room was the man who thought he could break you." "The system is broken, Your Honor," Wyatt said, his voice carrying a heavy exhaustion now that the adrenaline was fading. "Sometimes it requires a hammer to fix it." "Indeed," Hargrove agreed. "You are free to go, Chief Harlan, and on behalf of this court, thank you." Wyatt nodded respectfully. He picked up his cheap briefcase, adjusted his off-the-rack navy suit, and walked out through the swinging wooden gate. The karma that hit Trent Barlow was absolute and uncompromising. The federal trial was a media spectacle, a complete dismantling of a corrupt precinct. With the airtight video evidence, the testimony of his partner, and the forensic financial trails uncovered by the DOJ, Barlow's defense attorney didn't even attempt to take the case to a jury. Barlow pled guilty to multiple federal civil rights violations and was sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. True to her word, Judge Eleanor Hargrove ensured the sentencing judge knew exactly what kind of man Barlow was. But the ripple effects went far beyond one man. The DOJ Civil Rights Division placed the entire Metro Police Department under a sweeping federal consented decree. Policies were rewritten, body cameras were mandated and strictly monitored. Over 40 convictions secured by Barlow and his unit were overturned, returning fathers, sons, and brothers to their families. Jordan Weaver, the college student framed by Barlow, was released and awarded a massive civil settlement, allowing him to return to school and finish his degree. As for Wyatt Harlan, he didn't stick around for the press conferences or the media interviews. He had never been interested in fame. He was a Tier 1 operator. His job was to identify the threat, neutralize the target, and extract quietly. When Trent Barlow was officially sentenced, Wyatt was hundreds of miles away, standing in his dress blues on a naval base in Virginia. His phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a single text message from Agent Knox. "Target secured. 15 years. Good work, Chief." Wyatt read the message, deleted it, and looked out over the gray expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. He had fought enemies in foreign deserts and hostile jungles, but he knew that sometimes the most dangerous enemies were the ones operating in plain sight, hiding behind a badge in a broken system. He had used his one phone call to bring down a tyrant, proving that while corruption is loud and violent, justice, when properly applied, is a silent, devastating strike. True justice rarely arrives neatly packaged, but when it does, it echoes. Officer Barlow walked into that courtroom expecting to ruin a man's life. Instead, he dismantled his own. Arrogance met preparation, and corruption shattered against the immovable wall of discipline. Sometimes, karma doesn't just tap you on the shoulder. It pins you to the floor, reads you your rights, and lets the whole world watch you fall.